All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD1000 Web Development Technologies class, I'm going through and doing a series of video presentations based on one of the textbooks for the class. The book is Murox JavaScript and jQuery 4th edition, as you can see right there, and I'm going through the associated PowerPoint slides for the book. So far I've done Chapter 1, Introduction to Web Development, Chapter 2, Get Started Fast with JavaScript, and Chapter 3, The Essential JavaScript Statements, which leaves us to Chapter 4. Now we'll get introduced to how to use objects, how to use functions, how to handle events, and 2 illustrative applications. Oops. All right, so as we start out, here are our applied objectives along with our knowledge objectives. A couple more knowledge ones on the next page. And a couple more. Now again, as I keep harping on this, this is an introductory chapter. Not everything in this chapter may make sense to you right now. Hopefully it will by the time we finish the book. All right, we've talked already about the window object. We've talked already about the document object, and you've seen examples of each. We have not yet talked about the navigator object or the history object. The navigator object holds information about the browser, the version of the browser, what browser you're using, etc. The history object contains the URLs that you visited in that browser, all right? So again, a URL list, so to speak. Now here are some of the built-in objects that exist in JavaScript. What that means is these are all available to you if you want to use them. And there's nothing special you have to do, except since they're part of what's called an API or an application program interface, you must use them in the right way. Okay? And we looked a little bit at the array object already. Remember I said one way that you could create an array was to say new array. Yeah. And create a date is much the same way. Now, you'll notice that some of the ones near the bottom here talk about the fact that they're wrapper objects. All right? So notice they allow you to work with primitive data, but do non-primitive things to primitive data. And that's pretty much what they're talking about. And here is an example. So it says there JavaScript converts pi to a number object so that it can call with the toFix method. All right, so what's an object? Basically, you can make an object out of anything. I could make an object of type person as an example. And I could say that a person, the properties a person had, for example, would be maybe height, weight, eye color, hair color, gender. All right. Methods might be things like eat, sleep, drink, as an example. All right. And then we talked a little bit about some objects. Now, one thing we didn't talk about yet was this confirm dialog. Now, we've looked at prompt, okay, and we've looked at alert. And confirm basically is just that. It asks the user, are you sure you want to do this? And it allows the user to say okay or not okay. So you'll notice it says in there, are you sure you want to delete this item? And if you were to press OK, then indeed the item could be deleted. And if you pressed cancel, nothing would happen. It's as though you never did the operation to begin with. All right, we've looked at parseInt before. We've looked at parseFloat before. We've talked about those. You've seen several examples of them. So I'm not going to spend any more time going through them again. Now, these are new. The first two are new. All right, if you do a query selector, and again, I'm going back because by the time you've watched these videos, you will have hopefully taken the HTML, CSS portion of the class. So when you start talking about this stuff, all right, when you start talking about a query selector, we'll find, for instance, if I did a selector based on paragraph, and if there were 15 paragraphs, okay, it would find the first one. Query selector all would find all 15 paragraphs. So you see the difference, hopefully, between them. And they show some examples here. So notice we can use query selector with IDs, we can use query selector with classes, or we can use query selectors with element names. Drink that in for a minute if you would, please, because this is where it starts to get a little bit heavy. Had there been multiple IDs of rate, it would find only the first one. Here, it's finding all anchor tags because it's a query selector all. If I only wanted the first anchor tag, I'd use query selector A, not query selector all. And since we want to find everything, all elements with the class of error, it's again a query selector all. And you can use other things. So take a look at the first example there. It says return an array of all H2 elements that are inside of something with an ID of FAQs, F-A-Q-S. The next one says return an array of all div elements assigned to the class closed. And the third one says, give me all of that we just basically looked at. In other words, show me both H2s inside of ID FAQS and all paragraphs in a div. How to write a line of HTML into a document? Well, it's a document.write, and you can use any HTML tags you wish to use. If you want to put a blank line at the end, you don't use a \n, you use a BR for line break tag. If you remember, in the HTML portion of the class, we talked about forms. And our forms were mainly made up of text boxes. Now, they can be made up of other things other than that, but mainly they're text boxes. If we want to make sure that one text box has the cursor in it when the program first comes up or the form first starts to run, we can give that particular one the focus. So focus is an example of a method that you can put on the elements that are in a web page. You can also change the focus. When one element loses the focus and another one gains the focus, the one that lost the focus runs what's called a blur event, and the one that gets the focus runs a focus event. Some things that you can do with your text boxes, all right, you can give them values. You can disable them. All right, we'll do our own later we will do our own miles per gallon program where we'll allow the user to put in a miles driven and a gallons used, but then the actual MPG will be disabled. Why? Because if I put in 34, or let's say 340 for the miles driven and 10 for the gallons used, my MPG is 34. I shouldn't be able to change it. We've also, I think, started to look at the toFixed, which allows us to round something, or not round it, but put it to a certain number of digits. All right. Here's how we can throw a couple of text boxes onto the screen. And if you look in here, these two examples are doing the same thing. The first thing does it on 2 lines. The second thing, that actually would be on just 1 line, but they're running out of room, which is why they put it into 2 lines. But the first one is 2 statements. The second one is 1 statement. So you are using in there chaining. The chaining operator is the dot operator to do whatever it is you want to do. And here's another example. What's the advantage? Well, 3 lines versus 1 line. Less keystrokes. What's the advantage of using this one over this one? Maybe some clarity. All right. Next, let's jump into these JavaScript objects. And again, an object is anything you want it to be. So for instance, the example that's on the bottom of the slide here, const today equal new date, you are creating a new date object. When you want to create a new object, it's called instantiating or instancing the object. And almost always you use the new operator. So you can see that we're using it both in the syntax example up above and the actual when you're instantiating a date a little bit down below. The date object is mentioned right here, has some interesting properties. You can pluck out just about any portion of it you want. Sorry about that. Thought I had the phone muted and I didn't. All right. So here are some of the things that you can use with a string object. And you'll notice we can see where something begins in a string. We can grab a piece of a string. We could take a string and put it to lowercase or to uppercase, etc. So these are different types of objects and some of the different things that we can do to different types of objects. All right, let's talk functions. Okay, and let's look at a realistic example here. So let's say that I came in here. You remember this example. Let's get rid of it. So let's say that I did this. I said let number 1 equal, and I said here prompt parse int enter a whole number now, and we'll set it to 100. There's nothing special about that. And then we'll do it again. Let number 2 equal enter a whole number now, and we'll make that one 10. All right. And then we'll do this. We'll say let sum, I'm just lining these up so it's easy to see, equal number 1 plus number 2. let diff, which is the difference, equal number 1 minus number 2. Let prod, which is the product, equal number 1 times number 2. Let QUOT, for the quotient, equal number 1 divided by number 2. And finally, let modulo, which is our remainder operator, equal number 1 mod number 2. Now that'll work. It's totally fine. So after each one of these, I can come in here now and I can say alert, the sum is, in fact, I should be using my template literals. It's just good practice. $, sum. And like that. All right. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with what I've done. I'm going to grab this alert, and I'm going to grab these 2 lines, copy them, and put them here, and here, and here, and here. All right. So now I'm going to say the diff, or difference, is, and we'll use diff. Here, this will be the product is, and it'll be prod. This will be the quotient, and it'll be quote. And finally, this will be remainder, and this will be mod. You know what? It'll work just fine. So if I come in here, I'm just going to so I do a program run, and I put in 13, and then I put in 7. It's going to say the sum is 20, the difference is 6, the product is 91, the quotient is 1. It's an int divided by an int, so it'll throw that away, and the mod will be 6, or the remainder is 6. Totally fine. Absolutely nothing wrong with doing it this way. But what if I did this? I'm going to come up here and try to make this look a little nicer. So I'm going to write a function, and I'm going to call it main. There's nothing special about the word main in this language. All right? And I'm going to change this. All right. And this was do sum, and this is do diff. And hopefully it's, as you see this, it's making at least a little bit of sense to you. And what I'm telling you is I'm going to get the same exact results from right here. But what have I done? I've modularized the program. Now I've got kind of a supervisor here. We've got a beginning function that we call that's going to call this, then it's going to call this, then it's going to call this, then this, then this, then this, then this. You get the idea. All right. So it's pretty much going to look the same as it did before. All right. So I've got this let number 1. I'm not going to give it a value, and I'm not going to give this a value. But there's a problem right now. I've got to find some way to call this function so it can call the other ones. So down at the bottom, I'm going to invoke or call that function like this. And now I'm going to get the same kind of stuff that I got before. But I've modularized the program. I could do one more thing to modularize. All right. I don't really need 2 different functions here. These are doing the exact same thing, and that should be a 2. All right. But I can call input number 1 and input number 2, but I'm going to say here number 1 equals this, and number 2 equals that. All right. So now I can say prompt parse int right there, and I can say let num equals this, and then when I get done, just return num. Now I've got one generic function that's just called input number, and I've made my program even a little smaller. So that was just designed to show you what functions were and how to modularize programs. That was the idea behind this. So I showed you a little bit of that, and we're running over, so I'm going to stop right here and pick it up in the next video.